This is Writer's Voices with Monica and Caroline. I'm your host, Monica Hadley. Kayla Cagen is a writer and playwright, and this is her first book. It's called Piper Perish. It's a young adult novel.
It's not so much I want to write a novel as I want to write a story. What story do I want to tell, and why do I want to tell this story? And I was telling them, I said, I really want to write a novel that's like a journal, like a diary, because I also write in a diary, and I've been doing that since the 4th grade. And I said, I want it to be from the perspective of a high school senior, and I know she lives in Texas, and I just want to document a year of her life, and that's it. And I want to see if I can make it into a book. And they're like, go for it, try it out. If it doesn't work, it doesn't work. So I started it, and before I knew it, Piper had taken over. And I was kind of like, oh, I guess I am writing Piper, whoever she is. Here's this girl. She desperately wants to get to New York. I have to find out why. I have to figure out what's not going to let her. And I have to hope I can get her there. And that was my goal. And then I started writing it 30 minutes a day. That was my cap. And so I could have the rest of my life and do the rest of the work I needed to do. And then at the end of the year, I had 365 pages, or 383 pages of a book, of a first draft. And I was like, okay, now I think I like this. I'm going to revise it and try and send it out in the world and see if anybody else likes it too.
Wow. And how did the other characters show up for you?
The first character that showed up besides Piper was her best friend, Kit. And then the very first page, Kit's full name is Katrina Bash, but she goes by Kit. And Kit was the closest ally and best friend, because you can't have a high school girl without a best friend in my world. I'm like, you've got to have somebody. And Kit, immediately, I was like, Kit's much cooler than Piper, but she doesn't know it, and Piper doesn't know it either. Kit immediately, and Kit to me was the more grounded, almost likable version, because it's Piper's journal, and we often see Piper's point of view the whole time, and Piper doesn't know anyone's reading her journal. Piper can be pretty strong-minded and not always particularly nice in the way she evaluates things, but when she sees other people, especially people she loves, like Kit, then we get to see kind of their great qualities through her eyes. Mm. And the next person who arrived after Kit was her other best friend / ex-boyfriend, named Enzo, because Kit and Piper are talking about Enzo. And by the way, when I was writing them, I really was like, well, I guess there's a character named Enzo. And as soon as I would write their name down, I would then kind of brainstorm and go off on a different page and start writing out who they were and what their life was and why they were in this. Yeah, so they just kind of started a writing. I knew that she was going to have an issue with a sibling. Oftentimes, and I know it's thematically what I deal with a lot, when I'm writing younger characters, which is what I used to do more with playwriting and now in novels, I almost always have their central conflict with their siblings. Mm.
And why is that?
I mean, part of it is definitely me working my own stuff out, own sibling issues.
Uh-oh.
I'm fascinated with it. There's been all these studies in the last 10 years that siblings are truly supposed to be the ones that we're closest to, if we have them, because we live with them the longest amount of time, even longer traditionally than our parents, if nothing, if no tragedy has struck or anything like that.
Yeah.
And that there are other storytellers in our lives. So when your parents may pass on, the people who remember the events usually, if you live in the same house with them and if you have a closeness with them, are the sibling, and they are the other storyteller in your life. And I've always found that very fascinating, just like we're the storyteller of their life, and we may have a very different story than what they have of themselves, and vice versa. And I'm compelled by that constantly. I don't think I'll ever honestly let that go, even if I'm writing about older siblings at some point. I also
That's
used to
really
write about twins,
interesting.
and I'm not a twin, but I used to think, to share this brain and to see the same story from different points of view, I'm fascinated with that. So I knew that her biggest antagonist would be her sister. It doesn't happen all the time, but there's a lot of young adult writing where the parent is the natural enemy. And part of that is like the teenager is building their independence and leaving home in a contemporary novel. But I really didn't want to make the parents the enemies. They are not perfect, and they are faulted, and they have some issues I wish they would course correct. But they're pretty good parents. They do the best they can, and they make a fair amount of mistakes. But I didn't want them to be the evil villains.
Right.
They're not.
Right, and they're not. They're not.
No. I kind of wish they would step up and take some responsibilities when they need to, but we're all human, so I try to ingratiate them with that as well.
Now, Piper's sister has more than a normal amount of issues.
Yeah. I'm very careful with her sister's name is Marley, and I'm very careful with the way I describe her because my publisher, my editor, and I know what we have diagnosed her with and how we work through that with her. But I really didn't want to give a clear definition for a couple of reasons. One of them being that I think a lot of people who deal with a person in their family with mental illness don't always have the ability to get a clear answer or the clear diagnosis or the clear medication that would help them have a more normal life. And I know that there's a lot of mental health awareness now. And that there's a lot of people who do get help, and that's the great part of the story. But for those who are around the situation, who are suffering, and who don't always have the answers, and maybe not the skills, and or not the money to afford help, and or maybe there's another issue like a family pride where they don't talk about it or anything like that, I really wanted to address what happens when the problem is not solved, and when the character is not solved, and how the family continues in that orbit around that character or that person. It's important to me to see and to have teenagers and young readers who read this to go, oh yeah, I feel stuck like that too. I feel trapped like that too. I want to get away from my situation too. And not go, oh, you mean it always gets fixed? Well, that's funny. In my life, it doesn't get fixed. I think some young people don't get the happy ending.
Right.
The ribbon at the end.
Yeah.
And I know that when I was younger and I was having some issues with one of my siblings, it was a moment of I wish somebody, I felt like what I wanted was someone to tell me the truth, that maybe it doesn't get better, but it gets better by my own actions. And that for me means getting away. That doesn't mean they're going to ever be fixed so that I feel better.
Wow.
So it was important to me to leave it a little open-ended with Marley, that she's not a monster at the end of the book. But she definitely had made Piper's life pretty intolerable for a long, long time. And that sometimes, not all the time, and I don't want to be a pessimist, but sometimes people keep existing with their problems, and they don't get the help they need, and they don't change. And so...
And it's interesting because, like you said before, Piper doesn't come off looking that great in how she treats her sister either.
No, and that's the other thing. I love when people bring that up, because in comparison, Piper might look like the ideal sister, but Piper's not ideal. She's problematic. She's a procrastinator. She's got flaws up and down the map. However, in comparison, they'll say, and I don't think it's just something parents do. I think communities do this. They label one kid the bad kid and one the good kid, or oh, those are those sisters who always have drama going on. And I think in comparison, I would want to defend Piper and go, well, she's dealing with a lot. But you know what? Piper's not a wimp, and she kind of gives back when she can. And she does feel under threat, and she does feel, I think, underpowered compared to her sister. But she's not 100% blameless in the way the family treats her. I do think Piper's the only one who wants to confront the issues more.
Right.
The family. But
right.
I don't think, because she doesn't even get the help to confront, I think she's like, well, screw it. If you guys aren't going to help me out, then I'm certainly not going to back down.
Yeah.
So it's interesting, but I always feel like, well, Piper's not the excellent sister. I mean, she's a sister, but she's not perfect.
You're listening to Writers' Voices. I'm your host, Monica Hadley, and with me today is Kayla Cagen, author of Piper Perish.